The Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup presents No Bad Legos, Automated Accessibility Testing in Component-Driven Web Development with Howie Bollinger.
Hi, I'm Howie. I'm a front-end developer here at RedShelf. We are hiring as well, all the things. Brief overview of us, just to give some context of what I'm going to talk about as well. We are in the higher ed industry, and essentially what we do is partner with publishers, universities, and bookstores at universities to distribute publisher content to students. So basically, we do digital textbooks in the browser. That is what really introduced me to accessibility. So accessibility found me. I won't lie and say it's something I pursued out of nobility, but I am very glad that it found me at this point. It has really been a big focus of mine and everybody's at RedShelf over my time here. What I'm going to talk about today is front-end development and component-driven development, and a lot of the references and examples I give are going to refer to Ember.js, the front-end framework, and the syntax used there. But I want to just note that pretty much everything that I talk about has some equivalent in all of the modern front-end frameworks like Vue.js, AngularJS, React.js. I want to start off by revisiting the software development lifecycle. This is something that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I'm going to try to level set and get a baseline agreement of what I mean by this. Right, so you have your ideation phase where maybe your CEO is visited in their dream by an angel, and they say, you need this new feature on your website, put it on your website, and the CEO wakes up and finds their product manager and works with them to flesh that out, and they find the design team and hand it off to that design phase. And those designers will work with the engineers to figure out what might be possible. And then you get into the engineering phase where you actually build the thing, you implement it, and then you pass it off to the QA team, and you get that deployed and hand it off to customer experience. And from there, it might just go back into the whole life cycle again, whatever you've built and deployed. So then the big question is, where does accessibility live within that software development lifecycle? And I think a lot of people in the community in this room, we would all agree that it's everywhere. It's every step of the life cycle. We're all responsible for that, from the angel that visited the CEO all the way down to the customer experience team, helping customers out when they have problems. And so you kind of get that idea that accessibility isn't just a checklist. And I think this is a pretty common phrase and sentiment in the community as well. And it's certainly something I've said. It's something that I think is a part of our culture here at RedShelf and our engineering culture here at RedShelf. But it gets a little daunting, right? Like, okay, if it's this big kind of nebulous world of how do we build our products to be accessible, and we don't really know where to start, we're just kind of getting off the ground, thinking about accessibility. And it can be a little overwhelming, like me as an engineer, what do I do to promote accessibility? Where do I start? What can I do? So while accessibility is not just a checklist, and I very much believe that and agree with that, there absolutely still is a checklist, right? You can't deny that WCAG is a big old checklist. It's there, and it's useful, and it's helpful, and it's full of great information and standards and conventions. And as an engineer, I love this, right? We love checklists. We love being told what to do. We spend day after day making hundreds, if not thousands, of little micro decisions and trying to figure out where to go and what to do and what to name this stupid variable and all of it, right? So if there's a checklist, like, give it to me. It's going to tell me what to do. We're a lazy people, engineers, right? And so why do we like a checklist? Because we can automate them, right? It's what we love to do. If there's something more that we love than checklists, it's automating stuff so we don't have to do it. Again, we are lazy. So with that in mind, it gets into what does that mean for the engineering phase? How can I, as an engineer in this product team who's contributing to making this a more accessible product, what can I do to, what's the one little thing that I can do? How can I help? Well, what if we can automate accessibility? What if we can automate checking for WCAG, right? And guess what? We can, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So another great thing about engineers is that they love open source. If they figured out how to do something, they're going to share it with somebody else. And so the lovely folks at DQ have done that. So if you're familiar with, if you're not familiar with the Axe Accessibility Engine, it's an open source JavaScript framework maintained by DQ. And what it does is essentially take in HTML, parse it, and compare it against WCAG rules, and alert you if you have any violations against WCAG. It's a really, really great project, and a lot of teams and a lot of different products have implemented that engine into their products. Chrome and other major browsers are one of those products. So on the screen right now is a screenshot of the Chrome web browser with some dev tools open, and it's running the Axe accessibility checker in the dev tools against a web page in Chrome. Spoiler alert, RedShelf.com has some violations. I'm not going to try to hide that. We need to fix them. But you get really great information out of this. So moving on to the next slide, let's examine the output of running the Axe checker. We get a nice clear description of what the issue is. It says, ensure every form element has a label. Then it says impact critical with a link to learn more on DQ's website with some nice remediation techniques. It gives you the element location, so the ID of the element that's causing this violation. And it's even giving you the HTML of the element source. So I can see that it's an input element, and sure enough, it looks like it's probably unlabeled. And then at the bottom, it suggests some basic remediation techniques. So we're a little bit closer to automating here. We don't necessarily now have to know every single rule of WCAG to apply this, right? But again, we're lazy. Like I'm not going to run this every time I build my environment and open Chrome and look through every single item in this list. So how do we start to automate that? There are some great ways, like Selenium has Axe built in as an option, and you can use a Selenium test to run these big, kind of expensive tests. But we're going to go in a different direction and talk about component-driven development. And what I mean by that is really just the idea of breaking down our designs and features and functionality into smaller, reusable components that can be used across our applications and products. And with that, we really have the opportunity to isolate and minimize complexity. So let's take a look at a little bit of a visual example. So on the screen right now, I kind of have like a little mock-up of a search results page. So at the top is a heading that says search results, and what looks like an input that says search term Jane Austen, and then 4 results below that of 4 different books: Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Sensibility, and Persuasion. Gotta love Jane Austen. And so this is a pretty simple page, and if you're looking at it, and you heard me say there's 4 items in there, and they're pretty repetitive, they all follow the same template, right? And so maybe in a traditional piece of HTML that produces this, you might have the code on the screen right now, which is an H1 tag with the heading of search results, and then an unordered list that iterates through our list of search results. And for each of those search results, we render a list item and the relevant HTML for a book. And so there's an image tag and a couple divs that have the title, the author, and the description. Now, if we look at that part that just represents the book, we can start to think about how we can extract that out of this page and think about it as its own little entity. And so we can do just that, and we can make a component that we might call booksummary.hbs. Right, so now we have this single component that just represents what a simple, basic book might look like for a user. And when we revisit our search results page, we can really reduce the complexity of that page. So now, instead of rendering each of our elements, the image and the divs containing information, when we're iterating through our list of search results, we can just show a book summary component and give it the book that we want to render, rather than rendering 4 different lines of HTML on this page. And with that, now we can use that book summary component anywhere in our application, right? So right here, it's on our search results page, but we could use that exact same thing on our cart page. We could throw it on our checkout page, or a order confirmation, or an email receipt even. So we're really just allowing ourselves to reuse code. And so just to recap the benefits of that, it's a lot more scalable in that we can grow our application functionally across pages without kind of duplicating code across them. They're easier to maintain. If we want to update what a book should look like, right, we just have to update a component, and that's going to propagate across anywhere it's used. And it reduces the complexity, and most importantly for me, in my opinion, is that it allows us to write more focused tests. So, quick question poll, sort of. Who here is familiar with the concept of continuous integration? Maybe about 40% hands raised right there. And for the purpose of this talk, when I say continuous integration, I mean that when we write a component or a new page, we also create a test for that new component or page. And it'll be a JavaScript test that runs in the browser. And that test needs to pass, and it needs to cover all lines of code that we just wrote for the component. When those tests are introduced into the code base, if they break any tests, we won't actually let it get merged in. And so that continuous integration. So if we were to write a test for this book summary component, what might it look like? Again, I'm referencing the Ember.js framework, and specifically with the QUnit testing framework here. And the other frameworks are going to offer similar tools and features. But I have on the screen right now a little code block of what this test might look like. And so we start off by naming it, and I just named it, it renders a book summary with details. And then let's break it down. There's only 4 lines of code in here. And so that first line, when we're running these tests, they're running in a completely isolated environment. They're not related to the application. They're just in their own tiny little sandbox world. And so no data exists there, no backend or API. And so when you test, you got to make your own data. So here I'm just saying this.book equals and a basic JavaScript object that sets the fields like title and author. So I'm mocking out this object for my test. Then we render it. So this test framework allows us to just render a single instance of the component. So I'm rendering a book summary, and I'm saying render the fake book object that I just gave you. And this is going to be kind of what the output looks like, the same book card from the search results page that has just a cover image and a title and an author and a description. So we're in this isolated test environment. We've rendered this one thing. And now we can make some assertions. We can say, find the element with the class of book summary, and find the element in there with the class of title, and assert the text is what I expected it to be, in this case, Emma. And then you can do that with other parts of the component as well. So we're also asserting that the author element is populated with the correct text of Jane Austen. So this probably feels like, you're just telling me how to do Ember. I'm bored. And I apologize. So we'll change course and we'll talk about accessibility here. The reason I wanted to emphasize all of that so much is that's part of our practice. Like that's a common thing that we do as engineers. It's part of how we build our code already. And so if I'm thinking as an engineer, how can I start introducing accessibility into my project? I'm thinking, how can I amend my current process rather than introduce some whole new crazy thing, right? So with accessibility in this kind of testing environment, one option might be this. So I've added an additional assertion here that says, find the book summary element and find the image element in there and assert that the alt attribute is populated. And this isn't wrong. This is probably something I did when I first tried to test for accessibility when I was writing components and tests for those components. But you can imagine it might get pretty exhausting if you're trying to test against every single with-egg rule in your tests. And so there's got to be something better, right? I'm lazy and I'm not going to accept that process. It sounds miserable. Well, guess what? We do have something. And here's my attempt at a comical reference. The screen says, "Are you there, Axe? It's me, Ember." And I did spend over 3 years and a lot of money taking classes at Second City for improv and sketch writing. So that's a $10,000 joke, people. I did it. Tell them to accept me in auditions. But yes, Axe is there for Ember. Open source again. The lovely community of Ember developers created an add-on library for Ember applications called Ember A11Y testing. And what it is essentially a wrapper around that Axe library that we looked at earlier that can be used in those tests. And again, other front-end frameworks and testing frameworks have similar integrations with the Axe engine. So if you're using other frameworks, you probably have some path forward with this same concept. And let's look at exactly what this entails. So I've got the original test code back on here. We've got 4 lines where we create a mock book, we render an instance of the component, and we make 2 assertions. So what would it look like to introduce Ember A11Y testing here? Fortunately, this one's pretty easy. Even lazy little me is probably willing to do this. All we have to do is import the A11Y audit function from this library, now that we've included it in our project. And at the end of our test, or any point where we change the state of our component, we can just pass in the name of our element into this A11Y audit helper. And when that finishes, if it's successful, we say assert OK, and our test passed. If the A11Y audit test fails, that assertion is going to fail the test, fail our build. We're not going to let it in our code base. And so just highlighting here those additional lines. And this is just like what goes on in my brain. This is what I think of when I'm like, that A11Y audit function just like goes and finds that element and gives it a big old hug and looks at it and smells its hair and detects if there's any violations there. And it's what happens under the hood, I promise. I'm shaking my head no. So a really, really simple step to introduce into an existing process. And on top of that, we get some really great fast feedback in a number of different channels. So first, if you're running these tests in a headless browser in your terminal, you're going to get some fast output right there. It's going to give you pretty much the same output that we visited when we looked at the Axe Chrome extension, where it's telling us the number of violations. Then it's telling us the violation is critical. Images must have alternate text. It's saying there's one piece of offending markup, and it's giving us a link to DQ with remediation techniques. That's not enough for you. There's more. So if you're running these in actual Chrome, not a headless browser, you can open up your DevTools and see the same violations. And so violations 1, images must have alternate text. Here you also get some output of what the element is. So it's telling me the image with this source of book cover image is the element that's violating the rule. And I think this is so great because it's such a nice passive way to learn about this, right? If you're bringing on junior developers or folks who don't have much experience with accessibility, you can start off with just kind of an overview of WCAG and guide them to this process. And, you know, as they break stuff, the browser will tell them. You don't have to. Again, lazy. I can't stress it enough. So, just recapping some of the benefits of this library, you get that continuous and passive learning on great concepts like WCAG and basic HTML. And it's going to prevent introducing accessibility violations back into your code base, right? If I've got this book summary in there, and it's passing and it's great, and some developer later is like, no, I don't like that alt text, and they try to push that up, that test is going to fail, and let them know that they need to fix it. And it's faster than alternatives like Selenium or manual testing, right? You don't have to wait for the entire application to be built. You're just testing these little parts along the way and ensuring that you're really creating a foundation of small, reusable little bricks. Oh my gosh, the metaphor's coming, the title of the talk. It lets you bring a reusable and robust library of components to your code base. And so that is really how I think of it. We're looking for a box of Legos, and they're all good Legos, right? We have control over our code base. So what we put in there, what if we just make it good? You know, imagine, and just hold on to little name brand Legos, none of the bad ones. And I remember when I was a kid, Christmas one year came around, and I got to the tree, and I tore open these 2 big boxes, and it was a bunch of used Legos. And I was naturally quite disappointed, and it turned out they'd been my father's, and he was gifting them to me out of the generosity of his heart, apparently. And I was like, well, they're used, and I want something new that's still got like the plastic wrap on it, right? But I started playing with them. I'm like, no, these are great. Like, these make sense. They're all built to the same spec. They work together. It's incredible. And so I got super excited. I'm telling all my family and my friends how great they are. And they're like, I'm the Lego king at this point. And when a year goes by, my birthday comes along, and my uncle brought this beautifully wrapped gift. And I start opening it and see some familiar colors. I'm getting really excited. But as I finish opening it, right, those were some off-brand cheap Legos. Those were 3 Legos. I was not pleased. They would not work with the rest of my Legos. And they were quite frankly useless. And quite frankly, so is my uncle. And it's just not okay. And don't mess with my Lego set. So everything was not awesome. Reference, jokes. So it really lets us get to this point where we're building our own excellent, strong set of Legos. So on the screen right now, I have a screenshot of our own internal UI library here at RedShelf. And we're using this practice across this entire UI library. So any development team in our organization can pull from this list of components and use them and know that we're running these accessibility tests on these core base level components. And so they don't have to worry about that while they're building their applications. So on the screen right now is a demonstration of our card component. So it's got a white or a blue heading with white text, and then a content area, and then some action buttons, a primary and a secondary action button on the bottom. And we know as a developer when we use that here at RedShelf that those items are going to meet the WCAG rules that the Embraer 11Y testing and Axe Engine covered. So it really gives a nice sense of security. And I would like to think that it's brought some awareness in the organization as well. But with that in mind, it is certainly not a replacement for the whole process. Again, back to the start of this presentation, it's everybody's responsibility to contribute to the accessibility of a product. This is my one neurotic place where I make sure everybody in this organization follows this practice so that we can get that part of the conversation out of the way, right? Like, does it meet WCAG? Yeah, like let's talk about the fun part where we talk about what the application actually does and make those interactions accessible and those interactions delightful for all of our users. So absolutely not a replacement for the whole process. And I think that's a good thing. Like it really helps us kind of like think about the product as a whole, as a team. So just don't invite my uncle to be on your team, because he'll probably want to bring some like third-party garbage carousel library to get on your homepage because some demon visited him in his dreams. So again, not a replacement for the whole process, unfortunately. And let's recap some limitations. So this is really testing those low-level components, those building blocks, right? If I got my set of Legos and they're great, but I can build a house with no door and no windows, and little Emmett is not going to be able to get in there, right? He's stuck outside or inside probably. Emmett from the Lego movie is that reference. And so you still need these full application or acceptance tests, which you can accomplish in tools like Selenium, or you can accomplish in Ember as well with Qt. There's really great tools to actually run your entire application on the front end without a back end or an API and run these same kind of tests. There's a whole nother talk for that someday, maybe, if I have time. More limitations. So that's not, it's semi-static, right? Complex interactions like focus management and keyboard navigation can be tough or impossible to test. And you can use other techniques and approaches to accomplish those things. And it only tells you when you've misused something, like using an ARIA attribute to reference an element that doesn't exist in your page. It'll catch that, which is really, really great if you're new to like, associating ARIA attributes. But it won't tell you like you should do more, right? If you've got a button on your page that expands something else, and you don't have an ARIA controls or an ARIA expanded state or something, it's not going to catch that. It's not going to be like, be better. Be nice. We can get there someday. And then finally, there's no seal of approval outside of a team's review process. So like in a GitHub repo, you might see the code coverage badge on that repo that kind of gives you confidence that people are ready to test for that. There's nothing that's like explicitly saying these components are tested. Oh, my little piece of text disappeared. Well, there's still a green check mark. I'm back on a screenshot of the card documentation and proposing a piece of functionality that doesn't exist, which would be automatically badging each of our components to say they have an accessibility test. Again, someday, if I have time. And finally, that last limitation. I said I'm not too lazy to do that import and run that test, or run that line of code at the end of each test, but you do still have to manually import that Ember A11 testing library and add that line of code to the test. And that might only be 2 lines of code, but I have absolutely forgotten to do it, or been like, oh, it's too hard, I'm not gonna do it. And then somebody else calls me out in my pull request and like, aren't you the one that like cares about this? And I am, and so I fixed it. But imagine if we just built up this tool to automatically hook into the Axe engine anytime we're rendering a component and testing it. And what if we always hugged our code? Always grabbed our elements and smelled its hair and make sure it smells good. I love my code. I love our applications. So there are absolutely limitations. This is not an end-all, be-all solution. It is, again, a step that I can take as an engineer. It's the one thing I can do. Well, there's more things I can do, and more things that I do. But this is one that I know I can control. It's my kind of step in the software development lifecycle. So I guess with that, I challenge everyone to figure out what their step is in the software development lifecycle and where you can make some bad Lego references. With that, thank you. That's all of it. Also, thank you very much for being here. When they first asked if we could host it here, and I told our office manager, I was like, maybe like 40 people will show up. So there's a lot of you. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for dealing with our construction and our mess, I apologize. But eat more tacos and have another beer.
Next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions, but I can't promise I'll answer them elegantly.
Is there somewhere we can find examples of like code snippets?
You did a microphone, guys.
Sorry.
And can you
Some
repeat the question
example
for the live
code.
stream?
Some example code snippets of component examples that you gave there. Some maybe in different frameworks and that sort of thing.
I do not have any references. That would be a great slide to add here.
No problem. I'll search the web. I'll Google it.
Yes. Hard question.
I haven't written in a long time. Is there a reason you can't just import that library into the top of your unit testing framework and test everything?
So the question was, can't we just import that library at the whole start of the test setup? Absolutely, you could.
Not everything would pass.
Yeah, not everything would pass, and well, you'd still have to run that assertion
Okay.
in every single test. Yeah, well, that would be a good start, just importing at the top. Any other questions? No. Thank you.
Thanks to Howie Bollinger. You can contact him at howie@redshelf.com. Howie is a front-end developer at RedShelf. Follow them on Twitter at HelloRedShelf. Thanks to our venue sponsor, RedShelf. Visit them online at redshelf.com. Live captions provided by ACS, Alternative Communication Services. Visit them online at acscaptions.com. Live captions sponsored by McDonald's. We're loving it. This has been a production of the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. Visit them online at meetup.com/A11YCHI. Follow them on Twitter at twitter.com/A11YCHI. Follow them on Facebook at facebook.com/A11YCHI. Subscribe to their YouTube channel and view recordings of past meetup events at youtube.com/C/Chicago Digital Accessibility Inclusive Design. Copyright 2019 Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. All rights reserved.